Dexter went up against plenty of bad guys over the years, but they weren't all created equal. Some were smarter than others and created much bigger problems for him as a result. Today we are ranking every major villain in Dexter by intelligence, starting with one of the least impressive. Number 11, Lila West. Lila takes the idea of love making people do crazy things to extremes unheard of. The way she was acting in season 2 would have made you think she and Dexter had known each other for years, that they had been in some deeply complex long-term relationship that she just wasn't ready to let go of yet. Of course, in reality, they had only known each other for a few months, and in those few months, Dexter tried to get rid of her twice. Yet she somehow managed to convince herself that the two of them were soulmates. Dexter absolutely despised her by like the middle of the season, and she still couldn't take the hint. It wasn't even a hint at that point. He was outright telling her to leave him alone, stay away from his friends and family, and all but outright threatening her physical safety if she didn't. But that didn't matter to her. She was his soulmate after all. She was basically begging Dexter to kill her. If she had just allowed him to break up with her the first time he tried, or even the second time, she would probably still be alive, but she was too stupid to quit while she was ahead. And the worst part is that she thought she was absolutely brilliant. Meanwhile, she was an arsonist who didn't even know how to set a fire and make it look like an accident. When Dexter started to pull away and focus on Rita and the kids again, all it took was him needing to work one night and missing her call the next day for her to light her own apartment on fire and try to commit insurance fraud. Of course, it took forever for the insurance claim to go through because Lila was so stupid that she started the fire from multiple points of origin within the apartment. But fires don't work like that. It's not as if the flames would be jumping randomly from one spot in a house to the next. It looked intentional. Part of her plan did work though. Dexter actually did come to aid when he heard there was a fire. But even Dexter realized within a few minutes of helping her clean the place up that it looked like she did it herself. An expert arsonist she was not, but the sheer arrogance to even believe she could just do that and fool everyone, even seasoned fire investigators, that's a special kind of stupid. And as if that wasn't stupid enough, Lila decided to fuck with Dexter even after she knew he was the Bay Harbor butcher. Dokes told her that he was the butcher when she went to the cabin, and instead of having the normal instincts of a normal, intelligent human being, she decided to commit homicide and blow up the cabin in spectacular fashion. She is lucky no one else was around to see her fleeing the scene, because that explosion was huge. 1 second pair of eyes, someone fishing or driving in the area, and she wouldn't have been with Dexter as she planned. She'd be in a prison cell for the rest of her life. If anyone saw her or recognized her car or license plate, it would have been all over for her. But she wasn't done taking unnecessary risks yet. She found out that Dexter was planning to kill her even after she had killed Dokes for him. That should have been the final sign to leave him alone and maybe even run immediately. After all, a highly skilled serial killer with a grudge and a short temper was trying to kill her, and she had already given her enough reason to want her dead. But she just didn't know when to quit. Instead of leaving immediately, she started antagonizing Dexter. She called the station and made it seem like she was going to turn Dexter in. That's a great way to end up dead. Then she kidnapped Rita's kids and tried to kill them and Dexter in a fire. Hurting kids is another great way to evoke Dexter's rage. If she had taken 2 seconds to research anything about the Bay Harbor butcher, she would have learned who his victims were. She would have known that by being a killer and trying to kill again, she was all but dangling herself in front of Dexter as his next target. But she isn't smart enough to do that. She isn't even smart enough to kill a couple of kids. And she definitely isn't smart enough to take on Dexter. She was too stupid to live. She actually thought going to Paris would keep her safe from him. Delusional. Not only that, but if 2 kids had been found in her burnt down apartment, moving to another country, especially one that is fine extraditing criminals back to the US, wouldn't have kept her safe. If Dexter hadn't gotten to her first, killing Aster and Cody would have meant she was the subject of an FBI manhunt after Dokes. No one was just going to let her get away with that. She's an idiot to think they would have. It's only because Aster and Cody survived that she was able to stay free for as long as she did. The attempted murder charge alone, though, would have had her on a watch list, if nothing more. Lila was smart enough to wiggle her way past Dexter's defenses, but she wasn't smart enough to know when to back off, and in the end, that's what earned her a knife to the chest and the lowest ranking on this list. Number 10. Captain Aaron Spencer. Continuing with the theme of spurned lovers who were secretly overly jealous, erratic freaks, we have Captain Aaron Spencer. Captain Spencer has to be the most pathetic big bads of the series. His motives were so incredibly shallow that only a moron would go to the lengths he did to satisfy them. Spencer was salty that his wife left him after cheating on him for over 14 years. I don't know about you, but if someone was cheating on me for over a decade, or at all, I can't say that I would be too worried about the relationship officially ending. If anything, I would have ended it myself, but then again, I'm not insane. But Captain Spencer is, so instead of leaving, maybe getting some therapy and moving on, he decided to try to abduct and murder 2 kids and create the largest police investigation of the year. In order to get back at his ex-wife, Spencer figured he would take from her the thing she loved most, her son Nicky. But he couldn't just start with their son, it's always the ex-husband, right? He would have been interrogated right away if his own son went missing seemingly out of nowhere. So he decided to abduct another kid first to make it look like a pattern. He kidnapped Jimmy Powell, the son of a high-level judge in Miami, who was known for handing down harsh sentences to members of violent gangs and drug cartels. For a lunatic blinded by his own feelings of embarrassment and betrayal, that was a pretty smart move. It made it seem as if someone was just taking the kids of high-ranking officials in the justice system in Miami, and along with his position as the captain of homicide and the long-standing, good-natured relationships he had with everyone in the department, it did keep the suspicion off of him right up until the very end, and that part of his otherwise ludicrous plan may have worked. It was literally so simple for Dexter to piece it all together, and he just started working in the homicide department. He wasn't even a detective. Sure, Dexter has his lizard brain helping him sense when he was in the presence of a killer more easily than most people, but he isn't psychic. Captain Spencer could have rerouted his plan when he realized that Dexter was onto him. He could have fired Dexter for one reason or another. He could have done a lot of things to throw Dexter off, but he didn't. And make no mistake, Captain Spencer definitely knew that Dexter was onto him. Maybe he has some sort of sixth sense of his own. After all, he was also smart enough to take Harry off the case, knowing that he was the best detective in the department. I guess that is where his arrogance kicks in again. He didn't see Dexter as any real threat. Dexter was only 20 years old, he was new to the team, and he wasn't a detective. But Aaron should have known that forensics solve cases all the time, and even having just started, Dexter was looking like the sharpest intern they'd ever had. Dexter was showing very targeted interest in the Nikki Spencer case. He found the blood on the box that Nikki's finger was sent in. He thought to have it tested to see if it was a match for Nikki or may have been from the killer, and he recognized the hesitation marks on the cut, which Jimmy Powell didn't have. With all of that, Spencer should have rerouted, but instead he just tried to bury Dexter in paperwork to keep him busy. But Tanya was in charge of forensics, and if there was a major break in the case, if Spencer had his moments, but if he was smarter, he wouldn't have made such a spectacle out of the entire revenge plot in the first place. He wouldn't have allowed Dieter to keep working in his forensics department after he started catching on to him. I mean, if anyone else got suspicious, had the thought to look into him, tail him, monitor his actions on the case as closely as Dexter, they wouldn't have killed him, of course, but they could have figured it out too. Was he just gonna keep killing housefuls of potential suspects anytime the heat was on? Who was he going to pin for it? No way they would just let a case that high profile go cold. Aaron didn't even have a patsy in place for after he left his own son dangling from a bridge. It was far from some airtight, foolproof plan. It was what a completely deranged, self-absorbed moron would concoct, like he thought he was some evil genius. Evil? Definitely. Genius, not so much. In the end, he was just some pathetic divorced dad who handles a breakup worse than a teenager. Not exactly the makings of a criminal mastermind. Number 9, Miguel Prado. I really wanted to like Miguel Prado. He was charming, courageous, ambitious, and outwardly very gracious. Not only that, but he made Dexter feel accepted when no one else did. He accepted him even after knowing that he killed a man, and that is something Dexter was sure would never happen. He never thought he could have a real friend, and then Miguel came along. So it's too bad he turned out to be a crazy person with an ego the size of Florida. I'm sure that, like most young people with political and judicial aspirations, Miguel started his career off with good intentions. He probably just wanted to help clean up the streets of Miami, keep criminals off the street, and keep communities safe. His ambitions weren't entirely selfish. Even when Dexter finally met him, Miguel was always talking about how he wanted to make sure criminals were behind bars. It spurred his hatred for Ellen Wolf, the defense attorney who was constantly causing issues for his cases and convictions. But that in no way excuses the things he was willing to do to keep those criminals in prison. Miguel was definitely smart. Usually don't become assistant district attorney of a major city otherwise. He was good at playing politics, but to reach that echelon of the justice system, a man has to be pretty intelligent as a lawyer too. That takes brainpower and dedication. His influence in Miami was no secret, and he wielded that power as needed to get what he wanted, all while convincing the people around him that it was what was best for everyone. He was such a smooth talker that even Dexter was buying his bullshit for a while. But as is the case with so many of the villains Dexter encounters, Miguel's arrogance morphed what would have otherwise been a man of above average intelligence into a complete clown. Miguel's first mistake was giving Dexter that shirt with cow's blood on it. He may have thought that it was such a trusting gesture that Dexter wouldn't think to test it, but that was moronic. Dexter doesn't trust anyone, he never has. It was only a matter of time before he, a paranoid murderer who was specially trained in blood spatter analysis, would think to test that. And if he didn't want that to happen, he should have done a better job at keeping on Dexter's good side. But instead, Miguel broke every rule Dexter gave him, he shouted at him when Dexter tried to assert boundaries, and finally, he killed Ellen, an innocent woman, just for his own convenience. Again, this is after Dexter told him about the code. How could he possibly think that Dexter would be okay with him murdering Ellen? And if Dexter wasn't okay with it, wouldn't that make Miguel fair game in his eyes, putting them at odds and making Miguel a potential target for Dexter himself? If Miguel were smarter, he would have been able to map all of that out. He would have known better than to kill Ellen Wolf, and he definitely wouldn't have targeted Maria. That had nothing to do with keeping criminals from running the streets. He was only going after Maria to make sure she couldn't prove that he killed Ellen. And let's not forget that she only found out it was him because he was stupid enough to drive his own car to Ellen's house to do the deed. Not only that, but Miguel was able to figure out that Dexter was an experienced serial killer who always came out on top, but somehow he wasn't smart enough to know that going up against him would be a bad idea. And he thought someone like Dexter, a man he has seen pull off perfect kills, was going to be bested by a loser like George King. Was Miguel even thinking at all? Probably not, or at least not clearly, because if he had been, he would have quit when Dexter almost exposed him for what he did to Ellen Wolf just to teach him a lesson. But like I said, his arrogance made him an idiot. There is just no way that he took more than a few brain cells to construct his contrived plan of killing his known rival, then killing the lieutenant of homicide to cover it up, getting Dexter killed by proxy, and doing it all so perfectly that he would never be caught. He figured he would get away with all of this despite the fact that both Dexter and Maria managed to figure out that he was behind Ellen's death in basically no time at all. Miguel failed at doing one murder that spectacularly, but still thought he was going to get away scot-free with 3. Brilliant. And the police were hot on the Skinner's heels. Even if he had managed to kill Dexter for Miguel, there's no doubt that if he were picked up by police, George would either snitch on Miguel immediately or just extort Miguel by threatening to. This is especially true if it meant he could get a lighter sentence. What was Miguel's grand plan then? The fact of the matter is that Miguel messed up as soon as he tried to manipulate Dexter, and he really messed up when he killed Ellen. Once he did those things, there was no outcome available for him beyond dying on Dexter's table or going to prison. If he hadn't overestimated his own abilities, he may have been smart enough to make better choices for himself, but as it stands, he just wasn't as bright as he thought. Still, for all of his success in such a demanding career, and the fact that he was able to trick Dexter and even trip him up a few times, we have to acknowledge that Miguel isn't the least intelligent villain Dexter faced, but he was still dumber than a lot of them. Number 8, Jordan Chase. When we start getting into more intelligent victims when considering someone like Jordan Chase. Jordan Chase was a millionaire, a successful author and public speaker, and he was able to convince almost everyone that he was enlightened. But that isn't why he should be considered smart. Tons of people buy and believe garbage every day. The ability to trick people into consuming your product isn't a sign of broader intelligence so much as it is of good marketing ability. And that's an impressive skill. But it's not what makes Jordan Chase smarter than the first 2 villains on this list. No, Jordan Chase outpaces them in the brains department because his motives and methods were more sophisticated, and while they died within a year of committing their first murder, Jordan was able to get away with his sick little game for years. When it comes to his motives, Jordan's psychological wounds from childhood are to blame for what he would go on to do in adulthood. He used to be a fat, nerdy kid named Eugene that no one liked or respected. Like most teenage boys, he probably had his eyes set on pretty popular cheerleader types when he was in high school, but they weren't going to give a loser like Eugene the time of day. He was probably picked on for being overweight too. After all the bullying and rejection, it's obvious that Jordan decided he would never allow himself to experience those things again. He would lose weight, get rich, change his whole life, even his name, to ensure that no one would look down on him or overlook him ever again. This seems impressive, and it kind of is, but it also shows just how fragile Jordan was. He could have done those things for himself and been happy about his great life, but instead, he spent years letting his anger fester and morphed into a homicidal madman. He never stopped being that fat little boy inside, and he was prepared to make that everyone else's problem, apparently. As far as his methods, Jordan Chase was smart enough to keep his hands completely clean. Once he decided that he wanted to attack young blonde women for obvious reasons, he knew he couldn't let himself be held responsible if they ever talked. He needed plausible deniability, and he needed a line of defense between him and any investigation. That is why he formed the Barrel Girls gang in the first place, the 5 other losers he was able to convince to hurt women alongside him. Without ever lifting a finger, Jordan could witness and enjoy the pain and suffering of the women he desired, but never thought he could have. All he had to do was brainwash a handful of idiots into doing his bidding for him. If you want to get away with the torture and murder of women for several years, that's a fairly smart place to start. Kill the victims so they can never speak out and never have your DNA or any forensic evidence at all linking you to the bodies. He also had such tight control over the gang's minds that they would never turn him in. I don't know what he told them to make it happen, but none of them would turn on Jordan Chase. To their dying breath, they refused to expose him as part of the conspiracy. That was a very smart move on his part too. They are the only living witnesses, but he needs them to make the operation happen. That means he can't have them killed the way he did with the women. The only other way was to brainwash, or blackmail, them so effectively that they'd never talk. With those things in place, as well as all of his money, security, and connections, it's easy to see why Jordan was able to get almost 13 victims, and that's that's only counting the ones we know about from the tapes. There could be more from a time before the gang decided to start taping. Either way, a dozen victims is nothing to scoff at. So where did he mess up? It may have been useful to have other people doing all of the dirty work, but there is also the fatal flaw of that tactic. As they say, too many cooks can spoil the stew, and that is the very problem the Barrel Girls gang ran into. The only reason the gang ended up on Dexter's radar is because of a sloppy cleanup job done by one Boyd Fowler. Dexter found the bloody handprints of one of their victims in the back of a moving van he was renting. If someone else found those and reported them to the police, things would have gone south for the gang pretty soon anyway. Dexter finding them just moved up their sentencing and execution dates. Then there was the fact that the same guy who left evidence in the truck was keeping a living victim at his house. How was that allowed to happen? Sure, she was locked away in some closet, but being awake increased her chances of getting out or rescued, which is exactly what happened. But that's what makes the plan not so brilliant. That kind of sloppy work was inevitable because Jordan surrounded himself with idiots who had a lot less to lose than he did. They wouldn't be as careful because they weren't as smart as him, and they weren't as worried about being caught. They probably felt protected by him and his wealth. Not only that, but after years of getting away with it, they were probably starting to feel invincible. Jordan would never make a mistake like that on his own, but with so many other moving parts, it was only a matter of time before someone messed up. It was also very stupid to lure Dexter to that summer camp to try and kill him. If he wanted Dexter dead, he would have been better off hiring a hitman and leaving the country until the heat was off. The hitman probably would have failed every other hitman that targeted Dexter did, but Jordan didn't know that, and he would have lived to see another day if he hadn't tried to do it himself. He acknowledges himself that he's never done anything like that before. Dexter and Lumen have been picking off his lackeys like it was nothing, and yet Jordan thought all he had to do was kidnap Lumen and use her as bait. No one with a brain would have thought that they would be able to outmaneuver someone like Dexter, who had killed all of his friends and even his head of security so efficiently that there wasn't even a trace left of most of them. But hey, arrogance has brought down greater men than Jordan, and it just so happened to be his Achilles heel as well. Number 7, Travis Marshall, the Doomsday Killer. Some people may think that Travis Marshall was unintelligent, but that isn't exactly the case. Don't confuse his delusional state of mind for a lack of intelligence. He had his stupid moments, of course, and he definitely wasn't the smartest villain Dexter had to take on. But he wasn't a dummy. He was clearly better at manipulation than Leela or Miguel. Travis was so good at lying that he actually convinced Dexter that Professor Geller was not only alive, but the mastermind behind all of the killings. And that was without Dexter ever having seen the professor. The first time Dexter saw Geller, he was laying long dead in a deep freezer where he'd apparently been for a very long time, and that didn't happen until the 9th episode of the season. That means for the better part of the season, Dexter was completely on Travis's hook, and he was incredibly gifted in other areas. The amount of time, skill, engineering, and artistic ability that he had to have to construct those elaborate crime scenes can't be overlooked. He used one victim's body parts to create the illusion of several men riding on different horses. He successfully removed a man's intestines and replaced them with snakes before sewing him back up. Was he moonlighting as a surgeon? How did he know the proper way to dissect and suture human bodies like that? He had to be pretty smart to pick up all of those skills despite not being a professional. And the intricate details of each tableau, each carefully placed symbol. It could have all been the random work of a crazy person, but each clue actually tied into the next. That's how the police were able to figure it all out. And it even took them a while to piece it all together. Travis had a deep understanding of many topics from science to art to religion, and he knew how to outsmart the people around him to get what he wanted. He also had more complex motives than people like Aaron Spencer or Jordan Chase. They seemed to be driven by their own selfishness and insecurities. They just wanted revenge, and their crimes didn't really extend beyond that in any way. There wasn't anything very deep from most of the villains so far, but Travis was thinking very deeply. So deeply, in fact, he got lost inside his own delusions. He was clearly insane, but he thought he was doing something good and necessary. He really believed that the apocalypse had to happen to cleanse the earth, and that he was necessary to make that happen. And he wasn't half-assing it either. He took it all very seriously, and as a result, he was highly calculating and meticulous about every aspect of his plan. Miguel was so sloppy he was about to kill Freebo with his own gun in the rain one night, and he left with Freebo's blood on his shirt, and as soon as he actually killed one person on his own, he was immediately found out. Lila was so impulsive she couldn't help but make countless errors when she was trying to pull off her little insignificant schemes. Nothing controlled or smart about it, really. But Travis evaded police even as his body count continued to grow. He managed to avoid cameras for almost the entirety of his plan, despite setting up multiple complicated murder scenes all over the city. Anyone who was a total idiot would not have been able to do all of that while remaining on the lam. He also wasn't stupid enough to try to take Dexter on by himself like Jordan was. He enlisted the help of disciples, 2 more people he was able to completely brainwash into doing whatever God said. Dexter ended up killing those people while Travis remained alive and able to keep his mission going. Travis's stupidity shone through in small bursts. For instance, he visited the scene of his angel of death tableau while the police were there, allowing himself to be spotted by Dexter for the first time. And he wasn't exactly acting normally when he was there, so he stuck out like a sore thumb. Everyone else on the scene was running and ducking from the locusts. He was standing there basking in it all, as if he was happy or proud. Pretty dumb move. It was also sort of dumb to entrust the Wormwood operation to the shaky and confused Beth Dorsey. Of course, he couldn't go to the police department himself, but she seemed even more unstable than he was. Of course, she failed and died. She was a mess, and he still sent her to do that on her own. I guess just trusting the idea that she could manage a task that large and that she wouldn't turn him in if she failed, but managed to survive. He was playing a pretty dangerous game by thinking so highly of someone so batty and underconfident. And of course, she messed it all up and ended up being the only one to die in the attack. Travis was the leader though, so that debacle falls on him. He also made the mistake of underestimating Dexter in the 11th hour, as if he would actually inject himself with M99 and just sacrifice himself like that. Dexter wasn't one of his little disciples. He wasn't controlling Dexter at all, especially after kidnapping his son. He was stupid for even believing that. If he were smarter, he would have just left, using Harrison as a bargaining chip until he could get away from Dexter. But instead, he let Harrison get in the elevator and go. He ended up with a needle in his neck moments later as a result. Dexter didn't die in your lake of fire in the middle of the ocean. Don't you think he may have a few tricks up his sleeve? Travis was blinded by his mission, apparently, because just walking up to Dexter after he found him on top of that skyscraper with his son was ridiculous. And one more dumb moment was when he decided to kill his own sister the day after she was questioned by the police. Deb thought she should look into Geller's old students to get a lead in the case, and that led her to Travis Marshall, who was listed as staying at his sister's address. She has one conversation with a detective, and then she is dead in the middle of the city less than 24 hours later. Does that sound like something that is going to make you look less suspicious or more? He all but ensured the police would be after him, and him alone, when he did that. Overall, Travis Marshall was a formidable enemy. He racked up so many kills during his terror spree in Miami, and if he hadn't slipped up and let Dexter get too close, he may have gotten away with it all. At least for a little while longer. But he made some pretty dumb mistakes, proving that even if he was a master of many trades, he wasn't the smartest guy in any room, as long as Dexter was there too. He was pretty intelligent, but there are still villains who were smarter and more resourceful than the Doomsday Killer, and they had the body counts to show it. Number 6. Oliver Saxon, the brain surgeon. The brain surgeon has obviously been very intelligent from a very young age. Unfortunately, he was also very dangerous by then as well. Born Daniel Vogel, he showed violent tendencies before he reached adolescence, and by the time he was 14, he killed his younger brother out of jealousy. That wasn't very smart, of course. Not only because it was profoundly evil, but because it also got him the opposite of what he wanted. He killed his brother because he wanted more attention from his mother, but he ended up getting the opposite. Daniel was sent to a psychiatric institution in England for what he did, and he never saw his parents again. Stupid to kill his brother, but what he did to get out of his punishment showed how cunning and diabolical he already was at his young age. To escape the institution where his parents left him, Daniel locked 7 of the other kids who were staying at the facility in a room and started a fire, killing everyone inside. He faked his own death by staging it to seem like he was one of the children who was killed in the fire, and stole the identity of a deceased boy who would have been about his age, taking his name Oliver Saxon. With that, it was as if Daniel's entire past was erased. Better still, he was able to get 7 more victims, and no one would ever even think to blame him for the deaths or even look for him. He was killing and faking identities before Dexter had even figured out his ritual. So by the time the brain surgeon reached Miami, he was a smart and experienced killer, and it showed. As soon as he started his killing spree, Saxon had the cops on the ropes, another testament to his intelligence. He managed to kill 3 people, frame one of them for the first 2 killings, and evade an investigation altogether. Not only that, but as if he had some formal training, he was able to surgically remove specific parts of the human brain. We know for his purposes, he wanted the anterior insular cortex, the portion of the brain responsible for human empathy. Since breaking out of asylum, he obviously took the time to pick up some medical knowledge and training, and shaking the police before they even have sights on him? Nothing short of impressive. He opened and closed an investigation in one fell swoop, and no dummy could manage that. He was in a league all of his own. But Daniel wasn't all brains. He could act impulsively, which could get him targeted if he was too sloppy. And that's exactly what happened. Saxon killed Dexter's neighbor, Cassie Joelstein, who he'd been dating. This had nothing to do with his larger mission in Miami to get back at and reconnect with his mother. He killed Cassie in a fit of rage because she wanted to break up with him. They hadn't even been dating that long, but Saxon has deep rejection issues from his childhood. He tried to frame Zach Hamilton for her murder, but Zach had an alibi, so Dexter was able to figure out that he didn't do it. Then after Saxon killed Zach, scooped out his brain, and left his body in Dexter's apartment, Dexter found Saxon's hair in Zach's apartment. This eventually led him to finding out Saxon's real identity and thus the real identity of the brain surgeon. All of that was pretty sloppy for someone who has been killing and framing people since he was a teenager. He basically speedran his own downfall. He could have kept Dexter and the police in the dark if he hadn't killed Cassie. If he stayed focused on getting to Dr. Vogel and just convinced her to be his mother again and teach him how to live successfully as a killer, which is what he initially wanted, he would have been fine. Even after she knew that he was a killer, Dr. Vogel wanted to protect her son and have another chance at motherhood. She was already trying to protect him from Dexter. If he hadn't murdered Cassie and Zach, she would have kept doing that. But after watching what he did to Zach, which he weirdly videotaped, she knew he was a lost cause. And he did all of that to himself, and all because he can't control his urges. That was undoubtedly stupid and shows where the brain surgeon's weaknesses lie. He was also dumb to think that he could just walk into a busy hospital, kill a police lieutenant that he was already wanted for shooting, and just slip back out and live a life free of consequences. Batista had a gun to the back of his head minutes after he entered the hospital, and he wasn't some forgotten 14-year-old in a psychiatric ward across the pond anymore. Even if he had managed to pull that off, he would be one of the most wanted people in the country until they found him. He could try faking his death again, but the police knew his entire history by that point, so they probably wouldn't fall for that so easily. He didn't have a game plan after he killed his mom. He was being reckless, as if all of his strategic planning and intelligence had melted away, and maybe that's because the dumbest thing about Daniel Vogel was his plan and motives all along. He managed to start a new life with a new name. He was successfully killing people wherever he went, whenever he wanted. He was gainfully employed, and women obviously didn't mind dating him, at least for a little while. He could have kept living freely and doing all of that, but instead he had to go and find his mother, antagonize another serial killer, shoot a cop, and end up in jail. Until he started trying to contact his mother, he was living in a way no one looked twice at. After he went after her, everything went to shit, and he was dead within the next few weeks. He is an idiot for abandoning the perfect cover life he had set up as Oliver Saxon just to fulfill his mommy issues. He may have been a highly intelligent killer mastermind, but deep down he was still the unhinged boy Evelyn left at the psychiatric hospital all those years ago, and he was just dumb enough to let that control his entire fate. Number 5. Leon Prater. What can be said about a billionaire megalomaniac with a serial killer fetish and endless resources? Leon Prater was obviously a disturbed and obsessive man, but that didn't necessarily make him stupid. Despite a troubled and meager upbringing, he somehow managed to claw his way out of an orphanage and become something larger than life. It isn't exactly clear how Leon made all of his millions, but he clearly had some wits about him to pull that off. If it were anyone else, you may attribute all of his wealth to luck, but with his very unique backstory in mind, there is no doubt that his success was achieved through hard work, dedication, and a keen ability to navigate social echelons that should have been far out of his league. He had a vision in mind, and he knew how to make it a reality. That's not the work of some run-of-the-mill moron, and he wasn't stupid after he got his riches either. Plenty of people with his background don't know what to do when they finally get a bit of money. They piss it all away and make silly choices that'll almost ensure they'll never make that much money again. But Leon took the time to make a plan and secure his wealth and his place in society, all while continuing to grow his entire enterprise. He knew that he needed to protect his station, and he took the steps to make that happen. He ingratiated himself with smart, capable people and organizations of high power. He blanketed his entire compound and every place he went with the highest level of security, and even had his security surveilled. He wasn't going to leave his success or safety up to chance. He kept checks on everyone in his life and made sure that he was always in control of what went on around him. It was definitely the behavior of a paranoid man, but also very smart if you wanted to safely engage in the things that Leon was interested in. He knew how to manipulate people and keep them on his hook. He could make blackmail and extortion look like generous favors, holding people's deepest desires over their heads to ensure they did what he wanted. He spent years perfecting his public image so that no one would ever dare question him or his intentions. And if anyone ever did start to look into him, he would be the first to know. Leon was smart enough that he knew to use his quiet power to get people working for him inside law enforcement at every level. Any investigation into him wouldn't go far with that kind of help on his side. All that positive PR paired with such high levels of control and surveillance freed Leon up to do whatever he wanted, and that was no accident. It was intelligent design crafted by a very clever person who just so happened to also be a huge weirdo with terrible ethics. As awful as he was, Leon Prater tricked everyone into thinking he was wonderful and actually proved to everyone that he was a very intelligent person who was not to be underestimated. So where did he mess up? Well, first off, he decided to trust serial killers. He may have seen them as living trophies or pawns that he could exploit and control as he saw fit, but he also left himself open to a world of problems by associating with a group of deranged killers. Dexter's presence and his manner proved as much. Anybody with half a brain would know better than to casually run around with people who love to kill and took the time to get exceptionally skilled at doing so. But Leon was so full of himself and trusted his ability to control everything so much that he hardly acknowledged the danger that choice created in his life. And in the end, that cost him everything. He could have been a normal evil billionaire, making money in shady ways and using it to have fun and control society behind the scenes, but instead, he let his obsession with serial killers place him directly in harm's way for years. If any of the killers he willingly invited into his home had been as skilled as Dexter, one of them could have killed him way before Dexter and Harrison even got to New York, but he was too arrogant and dumb to see that. If he had seen it, it would have saved his life. But Leon let all of his power go to his head. His ego was so large, it could fill his entire compound, and he had the temper to match. Leon was a very careful guy, and he always tried to come off as generous and philanthropic, but his mask slipped pretty often, and that was a side of him that no one wanted to meet. For instance, the way he treated Charlie was nothing short of a power trip gone off the rails. He spoke to her like she was lower than a dog at times, and despite hiring her for her specialized expertise in protecting people, he ignored her instincts and warnings time and time again. Worse still, he betrayed her, keeping a file on her and planning to use it to his own advantage if he ever needed to. But what he really needed was Charlie on his side. She was very good at her job and she took it very seriously. She put up with all of his nonsense and poor treatment, even going so far as to collect and dispose of serial killers as he needed her to, but when she found out about that file, she was done. She quit on the spot, not even caring to make sure that Harrison and Dexter were taken care of before she did. If Leon was smarter, he would have known better than to cross Charlie. She may have needed him, but he needed her even more. The moment she stopped guarding him from every conceivable threat, he was a goner. He died within hours of her quitting, and it was all his fault. They say not to bite the hand that feeds you, but Leon wasn't smart enough to realize just how useful Charlie was to him, and what mistreating her could mean for him if she ever decided to leave. His stupidity cost him his main line of defense and eventually his life. Lastly, Leon saw everything that Dexter was capable of. Dexter was nothing like the other serial killers he'd been hanging out with. In fact, he made them look like amateurs. He pulled off hundreds of kills in 30 years never being caught. He had deeper motives than any of them. He managed to fake his identity so well that he fooled Leon for weeks while he killed all of his other serial killer club members. And despite all of that, Leon thought he could just kidnap his son and kill them both all on his own with absolutely no backup. What a stupid thing to think. Dexter is an agile and skilled killer, an apex predator with years of experience, and the only thing he loved on the line when he learned that Harrison was taken. But in that moment, Leon was just a crazed old man with a loaded gun. Anyone smarter would have known better than to face Dexter alone, but Leon couldn't make that same calculation. And let's not forget that he thought it would be a great idea to kill Angel Batista, a man he thought was a cop, on the same night that he was hosting his gala when almost every officer in the city would be in his house. Those are the kind of stupid mistakes that keep him from being ranked higher on this list. Number 4. Isaac Serco. Isaac Serco was a standout villain in the Dexter series for sure. If you want to see Dexter up against a truly intelligent adversary, this is who you would start with. If we are gauging intelligence off of power and success, Isaac Serco safely is in the ranks of those villains. He was one of the top brass for an incredibly powerful international mafia based in Ukraine. His position within the Koshka Brotherhood granted Isaac an unlimited bank account, tons of influence on their operations overseas, and excellent security everywhere he went. Not that he really needed it. Isaac was smart enough to learn how to protect himself. He could enter a bar with almost half a dozen of his ops inside, kill them all, and leave with barely a scratch on him. I say this to say, it was very wise of Isaac to make sure he was trained up in physical combat and marksmanship, because that no doubt helped him secure his position with the Koshkas. For someone like him, that's just smart life planning. Isaac is very intelligent, and that's made evident by the way he goes about his business. His instincts are strong in his ability to see the big picture from small pieces of information. He was smart enough to guess people's next moves, and he planned accordingly. And he was smart enough to stay focused on his goals. He didn't get distracted the way the brain surgeon was, or dragged, of course, the way Miguel was. He came to America to figure out what happened to his lover, Victor, and that's exactly what he did. He wasn't going to let the police, the Brotherhood, or anyone else stop him from getting to the bottom of Victor's disappearance. It was that laser focus that separates him from the dumber, more amateurish villains. He was actually successful in his mission to track down Victor's killer, but unfortunately for him, it was Dexter Morgan. But in a way, the fact that it was Dexter only served to prove how smart and capable Isaac was again. Dexter isn't easy to track, and he almost never gets tracked down, but Isaac was one of the few people who managed to do that. And he didn't just track him to his job, he tracked him all the way to his house and managed to break in without issue and wait for him. If he hadn't left the curtains open, which Dexter noticed because he never does, Dexter would have walked in, been shot instantly, and died that very day. Isaac messed up with the curtains, but he was as close to killing Dexter as anyone ever has been. That's a smart planner, an executor in action, no question. And he was able to track him down and almost kill him a second time when he shot at him in the donut shop. Dexter usually notices when he is being tailed, but he didn't notice Isaac doing it. You've got to wake up pretty early in the morning to pull one over on old Dex, but for Isaac, it's just another Tuesday. Isaac's intelligence is on full display again here. And Isaac also had an ability that most people who face Dexter lack. He knew when to back off. After the Koshas got fed up with his revenge mission interrupting their business affairs in Miami, they decided to send hitmen after him to take care of the problem, knowing he would never stop on his own. For a moment, that was pretty inconvenient for Isaac, but he realized pretty quickly what he had to do. He witnessed firsthand what Dexter was capable of. He managed to survive every attempt Isaac made on his life. He was smart enough to outpace Isaac, whose sole mission was to kill him. Isaac also learned that Dexter had already killed one of the hitmen sent after him when the two of them happened to break into Isaac's apartment at the same time. The hitman had a gun, Dexter only had a knife, yet he still managed to come out on top. That's when Isaac knew he needed Dexter's help. If he was still protected by the Koshkas, maybe he wouldn't have needed Dexter. But these killers were from the Koshkas. He was vulnerable, and his resources were wearing thin. He may have been blinded by his need for vengeance up to that point, but his survival instincts were top-notch. One of the smartest things Isaac ever did was back off of hunting Dexter and convincing him to help take those hitmen out instead. So many of the other villains underestimated Dexter, but Isaac wasn't dumb enough to do that. He respected Dexter and his ability as a killer. And he even took Hannah McKay as collateral to make sure Dexter wouldn't turn on him. Another very smart move. But Isaac made the mistake of allowing his love for Victor to dictate his life. Loyalty is a great quality to have, but Victor was a reckless, hot-headed killer who put both of them in danger by impulsively killing a cop. Isaac should have known better than to get involved with someone who would act like that. I guess he just couldn't help himself, but it was dumb of him to welcome such a huge weak spot into his life. His other weakest point was his obsession with getting even. If he was able to accept the loss of Victor in a healthier way, he would probably still be alive. As romantic as it was, dating Victor was stupid, and how Isaac handled his death was stupider. If it weren't for those issues, he'd be ranked higher on this list, because Isaac really was highly intelligent. And let's not forget that Isaac was very wise when it came to matters of the heart. He was an incredibly passionate man, and he loved deeply. The way he cared about Victor was dangerous and ill-advised, but it was real, and Isaac was excellent at expressing that, even after Victor was gone. He taught Dexter so much about how to show up more honestly in his relationships, and for a brief moment, before he was suddenly killed, it seemed like he and Dexter may have even become friends as Dexter learned more and more from him about balancing his serial killer life with his love life. Isaac was adept at both. He was really one of the smartest and most well-rounded villains Dexter has ever squared off against, but there were still a few even smarter and more effective than him. Number 3, Brian Moser, the NHI, and the Ice Truck. Killer Dexter's brother, Brian Moser, is without a doubt a top-tier fan favorite antagonist, and while he was definitely one of the most masterful villains in the Dexter franchise, he wasn't perfect. He was yet another killer Dexter had to face who was controlled by obsession and revenge. He was already showing some pretty concerning habits as a child, hitting and screaming and throwing tantrums when he didn't get his way, but after his mother was murdered and dismembered right in front of him, all of that got much worse. And as if that wasn't bad enough, he was then separated from Dexter, his only remaining family member, and then he pretty much lost what was left of his mind. From the moment he realized that he wouldn't be reunited with Dexter, he made it his life's mission to get back to him. He never forgot about Dexter, and the more people got in the way of the meeting, the more people died. He definitely deserved it because of all of the innocent lives he ruined, but Brian's obsession led him to an early grave. Much like Isaac and Lila, one of the dumbest things about Brian was that he didn't know when to quit. It was as if his life had no purpose beyond getting back to Dexter. That's no way to live, and as Brian soon found out, it's a deadly course to be on. That kind of obsession can result in some other dumb mistakes, impulsive moves that leave a killer vulnerable to getting caught. Dexter has never needed too much help to get his man, so one slip up could be the difference between a villain's plan succeeding or failing once they're in his orbit. That stupid sloppy slip up for Brian was choosing to attack Batista without having a clear plan mapped out. That isn't really like Brian, who, while wild and uninhibited, usually carried out his crimes with a level head and unmatched precision. It's how we managed to stay free for so long despite being an active killer since the early 90s. But when Batista came around his office asking questions to help him follow a lead in the Ice Truck killer case, Brian got spooked and tried to kill him like a day later. That's hardly enough time to create a foolproof plan, and if you are going to go around killing cops, you better have a solid plan of action in place if you plan to get away with it. But Brian didn't have one. He attacked Batista with a knife in a parking garage where other people saw him and intervened. Batista even managed to retaliate and bust his lip before he got away, and it was that very lip injury that exposed his identity as a TK to Dexter and threw off the entire timeline for his master plan to lure Dexter to him and jog his memory about their past. That was the beginning of the end for Brian, and it was all because of his own stupidity and short-sightedness. But Brian was still incredibly smart. Like I mentioned, he was able to be an active serial killer longer than most people. Brian's kill count and MO was so disturbingly impressive that even Leon Prater had memorabilia from his life inside of his trophy vault. How prolific Brian was is the first indicator of his intelligence. He somehow managed to figure out how to kill dozens and dozens of people and get away with it with no formal training. He didn't have any of the police resources Dexter had to help him stay undetected, and he didn't have Harry or Vogel to give him a manual on how to kill and get away with hit. All of his skills as a serial killer he acquired completely on his own. Even when he was first getting started as the NHI killer, he was able to stay off police radar while he killed his own therapist, 3 people he was fostered with as a child, and a woman named Barb Plimpton, who was the social worker who took him from Dexter in the first place. He had a little help from Harry, who hid his file from LaGuerta during the NHI investigation, but Harry tried himself to take Brian in when they finally came face to face at Barb Plimpton's crime scene, and by then, he had all but completed his initial plan of getting back at all of the people who he thought were responsible for keeping him from Dexter and ruining his childhood, and he was smart enough to act on Harry's slight hesitation when he confronted him. He used that brief second of hesitation to knock Harry out and get away, knowing that Harry couldn't tell anyone what happened anyway without exposing Dexter's dark past, which he knew he didn't want to do. This proves that Brian was always a cunning and calculating killer, and what he lacked in emotional stability, he made up for with shrewd decision-making that always kept him out of prison. No code necessary. And think about the MO he adopted when he re-emerged as the ice truck killer all those years later. By targeting sex workers, Brian was still killing people that the police would care less about. A smart move for any killer who wants to keep getting away with his crimes. On top of that, the way that he handled their bodies after killing them required an insane amount of skill and a vast amount of knowledge about human anatomy. He found a way to drain his victims of every ounce of their blood, something the homicide department had never even seen before. Then Brian would surgically dismember his victims with a level of precision that only medical professionals have. He also knew how to cut a man up piece by piece, but keep him alive for days. Did Brian actually have medical experience? How else would he know how to do all of that? Only someone with an impressive level of intelligence would be able to do all of that over and over again without ever leaving so much as a trace. It was never going to work out between Brian and Dexter, especially not after he tried to make Deb their first victim, but Brian is one of the few villains who actually got to see the end of their scheme play out before being killed by Dexter. That was another result of his quick thinking. He may have botched the improvisation of taking out Batista, but once he saw that Dexter and the police were closing in, Brian was able to change up his plan at the last minute. He kidnapped Deb, used her as bait, and got Dexter to put the puzzle together faster so he could be lured to their old childhood home. When Dexter got there, everything came rushing back and he remembered Brian, his mother, and everything that happened to them before Harry split them up. And that is exactly what Brian wanted. Of course, he would have preferred that Dexter chose him and killed Deb, and for a minute there, Dexter was actually considering it. But again, that was never going to happen, and it wasn't a result of Brian's stupidity. It was the result of Dexter's code and the feelings he had for Deb. Without those factors, Brian's plan would have been a complete success. He's a very smart guy, but if he wanted to stay alive longer, he should have found a less destructive path in life than obsessing over Dexter. Because no matter the reason behind it, that literally never ends well for anyone, even the smartest people. Number 2, Kurt Caldwell, the runaway killer. Kurt Caldwell was another killer who was so smart he managed to avoid police detection for years. In fact, he probably would have never been caught if Dexter hadn't come around. As he was waltzing around Iron Lake killing dozens of young women, Kurt didn't leave a drop of evidence behind. His ritual was so flawless, no one even considered him as a suspect in the disappearances. In fact, they weren't even sure that all of the cases were connected. His tracks were completely covered, and that is no small feat for someone who managed to kill at least 32 women. And Kurt made it a point to win over every person he met. He painted himself as the perfect friendly benefactor in town, always there to lend a hand when anyone needed just about anything. He was so revered in Iron Lake, some people referred to him as the unofficial mayor. This was no accident. Kurt needed everyone in the town to be drunk off of his generosity to keep his image as clean as possible. It was his cover life, and he lived it seamlessly. He could lie and manipulate with the best of them without missing a beat, and that wouldn't be easy for a killer of lower intelligence. Kurt made sure that he had the money and resources to influence and buy over the people of Iron Lake. He successfully ran 2 of the biggest businesses in town. He owned the diner and the truck stop in town. Everyone ate at the diner, and the truck stop was a major hub for commerce and employment in Iron Lake, and Kurt was in charge of it all. How could the townsfolk help but love him? His image was perfect, and his control was successfully veiled as a solid dedication to the town he loved. No one suspected a thing. Kurt engineered everything brilliantly. Much like the ice truck killer, Kurt was smart with his victim selection. By only killing troubled young women, almost all of whom were either just passing through town or known to have been looking for a way out, he was able to draw the fact that they were even murdered into question. Were they targeted by a killer, or did they just finally succeed at getting out of Iron Lake? Without any bodies ever being found, it was virtually impossible to say. That kind of valid discrediting kept Chief Bishop's investigation at a standstill for years and let him continue to run amok the whole time. And where did those bodies go? Kurt created a method to preserve each of their bodies perfectly and then stored them in an underground bunker on the outskirts of town where he figured no one would ever think to look. And again, until Dexter came around, it worked like a charm. It was a brilliant way to hide his crimes, and the fact that he knew how to keep all of the bodies, even the oldest ones, from decaying is a sign of very high intelligence and ability. And if there was any doubt left that Kurt is one of the most intelligent villains in Dexter's history, let's just remember everything he managed to do to Dexter in just a short amount of time. In the weeks following his son's disappearance, Kurt managed to find out that Dexter was responsible despite Dexter's best efforts to cover it up and lead the investigation away from himself. Everyone else might have bought Dexter's helpful little neighbor act, but it didn't fool Kurt for very long at all. And once he knew Dexter killed his son, he immediately started formulating a revenge plot that in the end would leave Dexter's life in shambles and almost got him killed. Some of the villains Dexter encountered may have been able to trip him up for a little bit, even annoy or inconvenience him, but Kurt all but destroyed him. He started by getting in between his relationship with Harrison, knowing it would piss Dexter off and throw him off his game. Then, once he earned Harrison's trust, he kidnapped him, had Dexter abducted too, and tried to force him to watch Harrison be gunned down in the woods. During that whole ordeal, Dexter ended up being shot in the leg and running for his life so he could get to Harrison before it was too late. Dexter did manage to save his son, but Kurt wasn't ready to give up. He set Dexter's cabin on fire and burned the entire thing to the ground, trying to get another shot at him and Harrison. Luckily, they weren't home that night, but that kind of spectacle only increased Angela's suspicion that Dexter was hiding something more sinister than an estranged son and a name change. It also allowed her to find the screw from Matt's hip surgery in the rubble, all but confirming that Dexter was involved in his disappearance. As if that wasn't enough, he placed the remaining screws directly in Angela's mailbox with a note that read, "Jim Lindsay killed Matt Caldwell." Shortly after she received that, Dexter was in handcuffs and then a jail cell. Kurt was very smart. He managed to almost kill Dexter's son, get him shot in the leg, ruin what was left of his relationship with Angela, burn down his home, expose him as Matt's killer, and get him thrown in jail. That's a level of retaliation Dexter rarely ever sees. By the time Kurt was done with Dexter, he was staring down the barrel of real prison time in New York and possible extradition to Florida to be tried as the Bay Harbor Butcher, where he could face the death penalty. Kurt had Dexter so desperate and scared that he broke his own code and killed an innocent man just to stay free. This, of course, obliterated his relationship with Harrison and left him shot in the chest and bleeding out in the snow. Even though he'd still ended up on a kill table, only a truly intelligent adversary could have done all of that to Dexter. Kurt was not the one to play with, and when Dexter crossed him, he clearly bit off more than he could chew, but he had a few failings as well. First of all, Kurt fumbled when he lied to Angela about Matt being alive and staying somewhere in New York. Every time she tried to confirm the information he told her about Matt, like the lie that he got a call from him after his disappearance, led to a dead end, which made Kurt look more and more suspicious himself. For that reason, the case against Dexter being Matt's killer became harder and harder to prove. If Angela wasn't already suspicious about Dexter's past in Miami and possible connection to the BHB killings, Kurt's lies almost guarantee that Dexter wouldn't have been arrested for Matt's death in the first place. Interrogated maybe, but not taken in. He almost ruined his own plan by arrogantly lying to a police chief as dogged as Angela. Another stupid thing Kurt did was keep all of his victims in a giant bunker on his property. Again, it was pretty well hidden, but one false move and every single crime he ever committed would be exposed. If he or Matt ever did anything that led to police needing to search Kurt's properties, his sick little hidey hole would have given everything away in an instant. Harry always told Dexter not to keep trophies, and for good reason. Dexter's little blood slides caused him so many problems. Something tells me that a room full of the perfectly preserved corpses of every girl who went missing in Iron Lake over the last 3 decades would be a little bit more of a problem for a killer if it was ever found. And in the end, that trophy room is what kept Dexter out of prison. By turning the location over to Angela and helping her solve the missing persons case, the biggest investigation of her entire career, Dexter got her to back off of him even after he killed Logan. She was so grateful and overwhelmed that she staged the scene where Dexter was shot to protect Harrison, allowed people to buy into the idea that Logan was killed in self-defense, and dropped out of Dexter's life like she never existed, saying only, "We're even," as her final words to him. Kurt's lies about Matt's death and his ridiculously over-the-top trophies made his entire plan to ruin Dexter's life fall apart. Those mistakes show that he isn't the perfect villain and that he is capable of making stupid mistakes, just like all of the killers that targeted Dexter before him. Still, Kurt's efforts to take Dexter down were incredibly impressive and only possible because of his noteworthy intelligence, natural instincts, and excellent foresight. The destruction he wrought in Dexter's life is almost incomprehensible. In fact, there was only one killer who was smart enough to hurt Dexter worse than Kurt Caldwell did. Number 1. Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer. That only leaves Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer. He is inarguably the smartest villain in the Dexter universe for a few very obvious reasons. First, let's consider the fact that Arthur was the most prolific serial killer in the series. That means that just like Kurt, Brian, and Dexter, there is no way that Arthur was anything short of highly intelligent. No killer of average intelligence would have amassed over 260 kills in their lifetime without so much as a wink of suspicion from any authorities anywhere. And Trinity played his ritual out all over the country. Of course, that made it harder for police to string all of his murders together. But it also means that he created hundreds of crime scenes all over the place and never left one speck of evidence. Even as technology and forensic science advanced, Arthur always managed to pull off every single kill without making a single mistake. Does that seem like something a dumb person could do? Definitely not. And then we need to look at how Trinity killed, because that was a major part of why he was never investigated as well. He was able to make 3 of the 4 kills in his cycle look like they weren't murders at all. When he killed the young boys as the first stage in his process, he buried them alive in concrete in the foundation of houses that were soon to be built. Much like Kurt's victims, these boys couldn't be proven murder victims because no bodies were ever found. They seemed like runaways, maybe even the victims of kidnappers or traffickers. Their cases always went cold and no one could find or prove anything, let alone land on a suspect. Next, he made the women he killed in the bathtubs look like instances of suicide. Without anything else to go on, like romantic partners or any known enemies, it was easy to assume the young women weren't targeted by anyone and had instead just chosen to take their own lives for one reason or another. No investigation needed there either. And then he made his 3rd victims look like they also committed suicide. He didn't push or throw them off the buildings, he forced them to jump on their own. That meant no signs of foul play and no need to look into their deaths any further. The only kills in his ritual that looked like murders were the bludgeonings, but because they all happened so far apart, both in time and in distance, there was no reason for anyone to think they were connected. With the exception of Frank Lundy, even the FBI missed everything. His ritual was foolproof and he knew it, and he also took the time to create the perfect cover life. Trinity went to church every Sunday. He took on the unassuming career of a school teacher to help him fly under the radar and avoid bringing any unnecessary attention to himself. He started a family that to the outside world looked like a normal, happy, thriving family. The kids participated in regular social activities, his wife was a successful homemaker, and they all did charity together. Arthur looked like the perfect father, husband, and community member. No one could look at him and see anything but that, and he made sure of that. He ruled his house with an iron fist, breaking down each member of his family mentally and emotionally until they were completely at his mercy. With a puppet family so perfectly broken, he knew they would never turn him in no matter how suspicious or violent his behavior got. He was virtually untouchable. There's no doubt that if Lundy never started looking into him, not even Dexter would have caught on to Arthur and he would have continued living out his kill cycle until he died or became physically incapable of pulling it off. His scheme was brilliant and it was because of how smart and careful he was. And make no mistake, he was another enemy who knew when to cut and run. Dexter knew everything about him. He saw him go berserk on his family at Thanksgiving. He caught him in the act of abducting a young boy. He knew he could be caught or turned in at any time after that. He gave Dexter the opportunity to back off, leave him alone, and move on with his life before things got any uglier. Even if Dexter had agreed to do that, Trinity knew he needed to run. He wasn't going to stick around and wait for Dexter to get him arrested or worse. He didn't need to kill Dexter. He didn't even care to square off with him. After he found out who Dexter was, Trinity warned him to back off and then went straight to the bank to drain and close his accounts. Then he shook down his family and ransacked his own house for anything of value so he'd have enough money to start his new life somewhere else. For everything that went wrong after Lundy started hunting him, he almost managed to get away with it all, even if he had to go on the run or leave the country. But then Arthur made the one mistake that cost him his life. The dumbest thing Arthur did was stay in Miami long enough for Dexter to get to him. After Dexter tried and failed to get Arthur on his table the first time, Arthur woke up with a vengeance. He may have been trying to find Dexter, he may have wanted to kill his entire family, either way. When he found Dexter's house, the only people there were Rita and Harrison. He settled for them. He killed Rita Morgan and left her in a tub of her own bloody bathwater. He spared Harrison but left him there crying in a pool of his own mother's blood, permanently scarring him. While he was busy doing all of that, Dexter got to his car, removed the oil cap, and made sure that Arthur wouldn't get far whenever he tried to escape. Arthur could have disappeared, he could have lived to fight and hide another day. But his need for vengeance distracted him just long enough for Dexter to get him on his table once and for all, and then it was all over, almost. Dexter returned home after the kill and found Rita's body. Arthur's final blow. Arthur ruined Dexter's life when he killed Rita. That was absolutely the most earth-shattering thing that ever happened to him. Not only did it make Dexter feel powerless and guilty for what happened to Rita, but it also blew up his entire family unit. His stepkids left, his youngest son was traumatized, and his wife was gone. It also led to Dexter being investigated by Quinn and Liddy, so even months and months after he had died, Arthur was still wreaking havoc in Dexter's life, and it really was never the same. To deal that kind of blow to someone as prepared and protective as Dexter, you have to be more than a deranged killer with a chip on his shoulder, and Trinity proved that he was much more than that. Arthur Mitchell was Dexter's most formidable opponent, and without his brain working overtime, that just wouldn't have been the case. Trinity was as evil as he was intelligent, and his history ensured that everyone knew it. But what do you think? Do you agree with our ranking? Who would you put in the top 3 spots? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked this one, check out our video breaking down the deadliest season of Dexter. The highest indicator of intelligence is slashing that subscribe button. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.